So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Alternative Economies and Reputation-Based Systems panel. We've been talking a lot about financial applications, infrastructure, and we're going to try to tie it together to see how blockchain is enabling new ways of understanding money and value. So we have some great panelists here. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. And then to frame the discussion, we're going to have a few slides. Just to give some context for what everyone has been working on and the issues that we're exploring here.
So I'm Primavera Filippi. I'm a legal researcher at the Development Center at Harvard and at the CNRS in Paris. I guess in the context of this panel, my research is mostly related to trying to understand how, using the blockchain, it is possible to design new organizational structure which are based on decentralized collaboration. And one of the main prerogatives in order to actually succeed with having decentralized collaboration that works at scale is obviously the design of reputation models. And so it's now many years that I'm trying to figure out how we can design and elaborate reputation/influence system for this kind of new organizational structure, along with the economic model that actually comes along this. So how can we bootstrap communities without relying on the traditional venture capitalist funding, but actually starting from scratch and then evolving as the value that is created by those community evolves, then the business model also evolves together.
I'm Greg Meredith. I'm a mathematician working with the Casper team inside Ethereum on their consensus protocol. But here I'm putting on a couple of different hats. I'm also the chief science officer for Synereo, which is a decentralized and distributed social network. And there we're quite interested in looking at alternative economies to kind of unhack our attention, right? If we think of Facebook and some of the other social media as having hacked our attention so that they're deriving a lot of value and betraying trust in a certain way, then can we reclaim some of that in a more decentralized setting? So that's the hat I'll be wearing here in this discussion.
Yes, my name is Michele Bauwens from the P2P Foundation. We're essentially an observatory of what we call commons-based peer production. So systems are based on open input, participatory processes, and commons-oriented output. And kind of facing a bit of a paradox, which is, if you're not famous, then you need reputation systems, and you can game them. But once you're famous, we don't need reputation systems. So this is a kind of a paradox, I think, about reputation systems. And maybe one worry that I have is, I think peer production is about moving from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation, so from your own internal passionate engagements. But then a lot of people seem to be thinking that we have to reintroduce a lot of extrinsic motivation into that by building all kinds of incentive systems. And I'm wondering whether that's really the right way of thinking about it, but I'll come back to that.
All right, I'm Jason Potts. I'm an innovation economist, an institutional economist from RMIT University in Melbourne. And my group and my research team have been looking at blockchain for a while now, trying to understand what's going on. We don't have any slides, but what I'd like to do is just do a quick introduction to the economics of what we think is going on with blockchain. Can I just have a show of hands? How many economists are actually in the room? More than I thought. So I want to start with economists have by and large ignored this latest thing called blockchain. And I think that's curious because we tend to pick up on most other new technologies. And I think what's interesting is why this seems to have been completely ignored. And I think it's a misdiagnosis. So what blockchain and Bitcoin get represented as a lot is a new information communication technology, or a new information technology. And we've seen those before, right? We've seen general purpose technologies before. There's internets and there's computers and there's electricity. And it looks like this is just another one of those. And so if that's the case, we can just go, yep, we know what's going to happen. Schumpeterian diffusion curve, end of story. Production function shifts out. And if that's the case, there's nothing really, it's interesting. It's a source of the economy will grow maybe, or something will change. But I think that's a fundamental misdiagnosis of what's going on. And the reason is that it's not that sort of technology. What has happened is, blockchain is an institutional technology, not an information technology. And there's an enormous difference between the two. So institutional revolutions are things that don't happen very often. Like the last time we had a major one in economics, we got things like, in the economy, we got things like private property rights systems, or centralized government systems, or the corporation, right? It's one of those types of revolutions that don't happen very often, that fundamentally change the nature of an economy. And I think this is the main sort of point that I think, once economists can see this, we'll quickly catch up and come back into the story. But what's going on here is that this isn't a story about how the economy grows because of this new technology. It's a story about how we can now create new economies in ways that we could never create new economies. It used to be that you have to have a government and a nation state and a money system and laws and legislation and all of these things. And there's 193 economies in the world, or however many nations there are. We're about to enter a world where the number of economies in the world will change hourly. It may well be measured in the billions, not the small hundreds. And these things will be largely built on technologies like the blockchain. And I think once you see that it's a governance technology, an institutional technological revolution, that's the interesting thing that I think has largely been missed, at least by the people on my side of the fence.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm just going to present very shortly a little history of money, but it's more of a futuristic vision of where money is going. So it all began with fiat currency. We have centrally administered currency that is issued by central banks, and the value of this currency is basically because of legal tender. Then comes Bitcoin, which is an actual decentralized digital currency, which relies on these strange blockchain technologies. And the value of Bitcoin actually is inherently based on the market. It's simply because some people actually consider Bitcoin to have any value and decide to purchase it. So the law of supply and demand actually provide the value to Bitcoin. And then we have the altcoins. So after Bitcoin came out, about thousands of alternative cryptocurrency emerged, which are pretty much based on the same concept, perhaps with some little modification in terms of consensus algorithm, or perhaps they add some features, but mostly it is just a cryptocurrency, and themselves as well, they are based on the concept of market-based values. So it is simply because some people actually consider them to be valuable. It became really valuable, like, for instance, Dogecoin, and then eventually the interest just dropped out, and then the value just disappeared. Now, more interesting, I think, types of which I think is now we're now moving a little bit further than the traditional concept of currency or money, is the concept of crypto tokens. So crypto tokens are those tokens that are issued as a representative of a share, kind of like a security, of a particular project or a particular organization that is based on the blockchain. And so in this case, the crypto token can be regarded as many different things, but the interesting thing is to question where does the value comes from. And in this sense, it actually depends on what is the use value of these crypto tokens. So if the crypto tokens is providing, for instance, a potential return on the profits of the organization, then that will be what the value of the crypto token is. But sometimes the crypto token is actually just used as a token. So it is the way in which we can actually enjoy a particular service. So for instance, in the case of Ethereum, the crypto token is the Ether, which is necessary in order to actually use the Ethereum platform. And so in this case, the value of this crypto token depends on the value of the service that the token actually provides access to. In the terms of crypto equity, it's a little bit more sophisticated because we actually enter into the context of governance. So when this crypto token is actually representative of a share, then it can provide specific privilege. Perhaps it can provide economic dividends. And in this case, the value of the token is inherently connected with what is the value of the actual organization that it is representing. And so what I would like to discuss here and to discuss with the panelists is what is so special about the blockchain is actually that it enables, by combining those three different use cases of a token, to create magic internet money. And so I will present a model in which, by combining those three different flavors, then we can actually use it in order to bootstrap communities and to allow for the long-term sustainability of projects which might be blockchain-based or which can simply use the blockchain as a way to actually fund themselves. So the first phase is the crypto equity phase. And in this case, it's basically whenever a group of people might come up with a great idea and they start talking about it, and obviously they have no funds in order to do it. But there is a bunch of people that actually really believe in this idea and that think that it might become successful in the long term. And those are the people that will be more likely to contribute. And those are often people that are risk-taking because there is actually, at this point in time, the value of the token is pretty much close to zero. So the contribution is unlikely to be rewarded unless there is actually a project that takes off in the future. So there is no actual value at the present, but there is a strong potential value if the project succeeds. So now the second phase of the project is when, so as more people start contributing for the project, then the project actually starts materializing. And there is a point in which the project can actually open up to the community. It can now be used by the public. And so in this case, whatever the tokens that had been received initially, which at the time were in the crypto equity field, now they change their nature and they now become crypto tokens, which will be used in order to benefit from the service. So one important condition in this case is that actually the only way to use the service is to use those tokens, which means that whoever has contributed in the beginning, they can use whatever crypto equity they had collected in order to benefit for free for the service that is provided now by the community. Those that did not contribute, now they need to purchase that token, and the way they can acquire it is by purchasing to those people that actually contributed in the past. And so now the use value of the token determines the actual value, and those that actually believed initially in the potential success of the project, they can be rewarded economically by the market or by the people that actually want to use the service. And then we have the third phase, which is at a particular point in time, the project might come to some kind of saturation. So there needs to be not so many contributors anymore that are actually providing contribution to the community. And so at this point, there is a problem because then the service becomes really attractive because it is actually a good service, but there needs to be not so many contributions, so the demand starts increasing a lot. So the value of the token becomes really high, which is great for the initial contributor that can now actually get paid for their initial efforts, but it can create a lot of problems if the volatility or if the value raises too much. And that's the point in which the community themselves can decide to actually put a limit. And so the communities will decide to sell tokens themselves. So now there is a new way for individuals to actually acquire tokens. So in addition to the contribution and to acquiring them on the market, it is now possible to acquire them directly to the community, which means that whenever the market price of the token hits the upper margin, so for instance, the community might say, we don't want the tokens to be more expensive than $10. Then whenever the market price raises over $10, people will no longer purchase it on the market. They will purchase it directly to the community, which means that now the community itself as an organization is actually accumulating funds. And the more those funds can now be used in order to redeem the tokens. And so at this point, what used to be a crypto equity because it had no value except that it represented a valuable contribution to the project. And then became a crypto token because it was an actual use of the service, now become really close to digital currency, because as the funds of the community increase, because people keep purchasing directly from the community, then there is a slow progression towards an actual peg. And then at the end, it means that people that are contributing to the community and that receive those tokens, in fact, they are receiving currency because they can immediately redeem it, and they know exactly at what is the value at which they can redeem it. And so we pass from a level of no funds at all and only risk-taking individuals contributing to the community to an intermediary level where people know that they can actually benefit from the service of the community, to the last point in which the most risk-adverse individual that only would like to contribute if they know precisely what is the economic consideration will actually contribute. And so this is like a little graphic that shows the three different ways in which, the three ways to acquire the token at the end. There is the three ways still operate at the same time. So people can still contribute to the community. Those that actually don't want to pay, they just contribute and they will be rewarded with those tokens. Those that actually want to purchase it on the market, they can, and therefore they will reward the contributors that have accumulated more tokens than they need. Or it is possible to purchase it directly to the community and therefore increase the funds of the community. And so, well, this basically has two important benefits. One is that it makes it possible to bootstrap community or organization with this magic internet money, which actually starts as magic internet money, but as the community materializes and become actually valuable for the ecosystem, it actually becomes real money. And the second one is that it actually becomes now possible to have a variety of multiple value systems of different value, in the sense that every organization can have its own tokens, and those tokens are actually representing what is the value system of that community. So while it is always possible to exchange those tokens for particular fiat currency, it also becomes possible to create a more systematic exchange by which certain communities that see value in the token of another community can start exchanging between those, and eventually you can actually create a really sophisticated system of exchange that you can even always bypass the fiat currency. That's it.
So I think you guys framed this up very well in that we're not just talking about making these highways for passing money faster and more economically efficient, but rather we're creating a new grid that connects different kinds of people in different ways. We're not just transferring this money, these tokens around faster, but we're changing what those tokens mean. Is this model viable?
I have to say that one big problem is actually the legal system. I'm not sure whether it is complying with securities law, but it is possible that we need to figure out how to make it compliant with securities laws, basically.
Yes, I'm trying to make a more general point. This is a bit of pop history, the three revolutions in human productivity. So the first invention is coercive labor that gave us civilization. Slavery, serfdom, that's how we created castles and temples. In other words, the motivation there is external negative motivation. I conquer you, I could kill you, but out of the goodness of my heart, I let you live, and you can work for me for the rest of your life. This is the social contract of slavery. I think capitalism introduces something new, which is, well, it's not just about that, but also about self-interest. In other words, positive extrinsic motivation. I'm doing something because I'm going to get something for it, right? Which is really give a boost to human science and technology, etc. I think we're going through a third revolution now, which is about actually moving from extrinsic to intrinsic. So we are building systems, open contributory systems like Wikipedia and others, where people are actually there for a variety of motivations, but they are mostly in intrinsic motivation. I want to create a global internet encyclopedia. I want to create this. I want to learn from it. There's various motivations. And so I think the danger and it's really a bit complicated, but we know, for example, from blood sampling, right, where people give their blood for free, and then some clever people say, well, you know, if we create more incentives, we'll get even more blood, right? Except it doesn't work. Because once you introduce payment for blood, what happens is actually the contrary. So people who are giving for free think, well, you know, it's a business. Why should I contribute, you know, to this? I'm not interested. And others who may not have good blood but are homeless or, you know, have issues say, oh, I can get money by giving my blood. So you have less blood and of lesser quality, and this is famously called the crowding out phenomena, right? And I have seen many, many times that if you have a commons and you introduce incentives, that it actually have the opposite effect. So years ago, I was something called ONET, which is Omidyar, wanted to give his money away, and instead of saying, you know, I'll decide where the money goes, let's have a network, and people can judge each other and create karma, and at the end of the year, 10 projects will get my money. Well, needless to say, it was horrible, because everybody was strategizing, and I'll give you this, and if you give me that. And you know, it really wasn't the commons at all. It was a place where everybody was you know, looking for their own benefit, which was getting the pot of money at the end of the rainbow. So here's the issue. So we have commonses where people are contributing and usually following social logics or their own intrinsic motivation. And then there's a need to make a living. And so what we're doing, what some people are doing now, is to create ethical entrepreneurial coalitions around these commons. And then the question becomes, what is the relation between the logic of the commons and the logic of the market? And I think this is where we can make different choices. So one choice is, which I like the most, is actually not to mix it. So you have people contributing to the commons, and that's really fine, and they may be paid or not paid, but they do it for their own reasons. And then we have another separate sphere where people make a living by creating added value around those resources. And there's issues of fairness we can work on. And so, but the thing is that you don't necessarily want to mix both, right? So for example, if you look at Sensorica, which is a Canada-based open scientific hardware community, which seems to be growing quite sensibly, you already see a different mentality. The people who work there in Sensorica, they want to make sure that all their contributions will be rewarded fairly. And so there's a more direct connection between the market. So basically the way it works there is you log your time, your contributions in space, in money, in time, whatever. You get a peer evaluation, you get karma, and then the money that gets made after the fact flows back directly. But what you see in Sensorica is that this is happening, is people start discussing, this is not fair, this is not fair. In other words, they change a logic of abundance to a logic of scarcity and competition. So this is kind of my challenge to the kind of things that people are trying to do in this sphere, is are you sure that's not what you're doing? Are you sure that by reintroducing extrinsic motivation into a field of intrinsic motivation, you're actually not corrupting the social logic which is at the basis of the commons? It's just a question. I don't have all the answers, but for me this is kind of what I like to throw in the pond as one of the issues. Are we sure we always need incentives? Because, you know, that seemed to be like, for me, one of the bases of liberal thinking, right? People don't do anything if they don't have incentives. And sorry, I talked too long, but you know, take a human resources department, right? People are not motivated. What can we do to motivate them? Well, of course they're not motivated, because you're subordinated, you have to listen to other people, you're usually contributing to the destruction of the planet. Of course you're not motivated. And we know only 1 out of 5 people are motivated. Then you go to the Wikipedia, and 100% of the people are motivated. They don't need HR, they don't need incentives, they're just doing it. So that's my point.
I'm going to slightly disagree with that and put a different perspective on this. Just building out of the question of the nature of money in the system. I think this is a really hard thing to get your head around. And the crucial thing to understand about the way money works in any system is that the focus is not on money per se, as in the coin, the exchange value, the store of value. That's the obvious bit. The harder bit to see is the monetary system that's behind it. And the difference is crucial because, so there's basically three huge economists of the blockchain, Hayek, Ostrom, and James Buchanan, rules, commons, and distributed information and money. And this is the Hayek side of it. So the nature of a monetary system, just any economy, anytime human beings are coming together to create value, they need to coordinate. And the way in which you coordinate determines the type of economic system you've got. If you have centralized command, it's a command system. If you use prices, property rights, markets, it's a market system. And then there's this middle ground in the middle called a commons, which is, so I just want to just suggest that this discussion that there's an either or between the market, which looks like it has prices and money and property rights, and a commons, which looks like it doesn't, is I think a little bit of a false dichotomy, because when I was looking at Primavera's thing, what I was seeing there was a commons that's done with money, which sounds counterintuitive. But if you go monetary system and understand that all that's going on there is a token system, and the purpose of the token system is to publicly coordinate private actions. And that's the interesting part of this. So it's not a monetary system, it's not a price system per se, but it's still a system where you've got coordination going on, where individuals are able to look at the tokens, what they're doing, the tokens are doing the coordinating, and adjust their behavior with respect to that. And what you get then is emergent order. That emergent order is an economy. The proper word for it is a catalaxy. Not an economy, but it's the tokens are doing the coordinating, and they're not doing it because of their exchange value or their use value or their store of value. They're doing it because of their coordination value. And I think something that can look quite commons-like in the sense of there's a collective resource being created, there's a rule system, that's the James Buchanan side of it, but it's not money yet, but it looks like money. So I think that's the issue we're trying to sort of understand here is what I meant before, in the sense that anything that can do that, rules that can create private coordination using a public signal, is an economy.
So I'd actually like to respond to the question you asked earlier. Can this work? And I think Synereo has kind of taken the step off the cliff, and are hoping to build our wings on the way down, in the sense that we've already created one of these kinds of token systems that we call the attention economy. And to relate it to what you've said, one of the things that's interesting to me and was motivating both to the founders of Synereo and also to the Synereo community is, if you don't, right? I think it's very clear that there's a need to connect, that social networks and social communication systems are of high value to people. The issue is that there are other people who are reaping all of the value, and that might be okay, because it's very costly to have a bunch of computers, a bunch of bandwidth, and a bunch of storage. That's incredibly costly. But if the people who own those networks then betray trust, run psychology experiments on the constituents and sell their personally identifiable information, then that becomes a problem, right? And so my question back to you would be: is it ever possible to disconnect the economic reality from at least the online commons? It seems that ignoring the fact that the online commons actually cost something in terms of physical resources is that's a dangerous thing to ignore.
So just to avoid any misunderstanding, in my way of thinking, I'm not ignoring nor the market and the cost of goods. It's really about the best way to combine them. And that, you have, like, for example, church and state, right? We decided as a civilization in the West that it was better to have a separation between church and state. But you have other systems where they don't have that, right? Where the ideal is theocracy. So this is what I'm trying to say, is that we have a choice between systems that kind of merge and converge those two fields, and other visions, which I think is probably mine, where we actually think it's better not to mix it too much. But we still need market or other ways to fund, the resources and cost the resources. But that doesn't necessarily mean we need tokens in the commons. That's just what I'm saying. And I just want to say a little word, because this is a friend of mine and I really like it. When he talks about these things, he says they are current Cs, right? So it's not money, but it's creating things that allow us to see currents. I think that's a brilliant way to describe what you guys are trying to do.
And yeah, I would just like to answer Michel, because this is actually, so I come from the common-based world, and I actually have been thinking really a lot about whether incorporating this kind of economic incentives into the commons might actually disrupt them. I do actually think that it's definitely distorting them, because anyhow, whatever incentive you create is gonna distort. I think I have two, so I came up with two understanding. I don't know if they are correct, but this is my intuition is that on the one hand, I think the economic tokens, so in this model I didn't present everything, but you have tokens which are transferable and which are the representatives of how valuable your contribution has been made. So that's kind of like a reward mechanism. But you also have tokens which are more like what Jason was describing, which are actually just an indicator, and those are not transferable, and those are more like the reputation/influence that you acquire within the community. And I believe that while the transferable tokens definitely incorporate a lot of similarities with the market mechanism, even though they differ from the traditional market logics, and they definitely might create some kind of distortion at the level of the incentive. I believe that the fact of the non-transferable ones, the ones that are more based on the reputation, also have distortion, because of course you can start seeing, you can see your reputation, you can start understanding what is the influence of the different actors in the community, which can have a distorting effect, but could also be a positive effect. And in this sense, even the fact of contributing to a community and actually seeing whether your contribution is valued or not, it's kind of useful in order to actually direct your behavior, because maybe I'm wasting a lot of time doing something that actually the community doesn't care much, but maybe another community cares a lot, and I will see that because they will reward me and that one does not reward me. And the second thing is I think it's the scalability. So I think that we have to be careful at which community we can implement this. I have lots of people that have asked me, please never do that for Wikipedia, for instance, because Wikipedia works, and therefore probably we don't need that. But there are many other communities that maybe do not work as well, and perhaps this will be interesting to test it on them. And I think the problem is that the commons-based solution, I think they have immense potential, but the lack of an incentive, of an economic incentive, is also limiting the way in which they can scale. Mainly, on the one hand, because you have people that maybe don't care, maybe they care but not enough, and a little bit of an economic incentive might actually bring them in, or because actually they care a lot, but they also need to survive in a market-based economy in order to pay rent, etc. Right? Yeah, I'm done. And so, in this sense, I think that if we want a common-based solution to scale, we also have to recognize that we need to make it attractive to people that maybe do not share completely the same value system, but only share parts of them, and give them a little bit of something else so that they can actually quit or reduce their involvement in the non-common based settings and join stronger into the common based one.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah,
Go ahead.
Actually, that was. I think both of these comments are intriguingly reflected in the thinking that went into Synereo, in the sense that we have both a transferable currency, which is the AMPs, which is sort of to reflect a kind of. I mean, the intention is so that value can follow valued content, and the originators and curators of valued content can be rewarded for the work that they're providing to the community. But then there's also a notion of reputation, sort of the Rio scores, which is a non-transferable reputation-based idea. And I think that it reflects your idea of kind of keeping them separate, but recognizing that they're interlocked. I mean, something similar happens in democratic capitalist societies, right? You have monetary mechanisms like currency, which is in some sense about the expression of individual will, and then you have voting, which is essentially non-transferable, and this is about collective will, right? And the idea is you have these two knobs on the system, and they have to be interlocked in order to get a kind of balancing, right? If you had only reputation, the landscape tilts too much one way, and if you have only monetary, then the landscape tilts the other way.
So I want to just ask one last question for you guys to answer before we open it up for questions. One of the really fascinating and I think very cool things that you can do with the technology is redefine what money is. And increasingly we're finding that GDP, which is the traditional measure of value creation in the economy, we previously thought GDP is the cake and everything else, all those niceties are just the icing. And we're increasingly finding that it's actually the flip side, that it's actually all of the other uncounted things in the economy that are creating the value. So, the potential of these technologies to make visible those transactions that are really creating value, and for people who are adding value to survive economically in the system and to be able to continue in that work, I think is incredibly powerful. Not to mention the fact that, right now we're using very crude measures of what the reliability of somebody is to give them access to capital. Imagine, being able to have something a little bit better than what some third party said about what bill you paid, but rather your community who can vouch for you, be able to basically give you the reputational rating to be able to fulfill your dreams. So that's, some incredible potential that you have with this technology, that you can somehow change the locus of power, and often it takes some sort of money or capital or some representation of value to move around the world to flip that directionality. On the other hand, it may, just like you said, Michelle, introduce a kind of a monetary or an economic incentivization to every interaction. So maybe I help my neighbor not because I really want to help my neighbor, but because I know they're going to give me a nice little rating, and that'll bump me up in this community. How do you see kind of the opportunities and tensions offered by the technology? And certainly, hopefully, we can do much better than the current tokens and monetary systems we have now. Yeah, for everybody.
So just GDP is interesting. Like the only reason we measure GDP, and we have been doing so since the 1940s, is for a planned economy. It was about a wartime planned economy, and you only measure the aggregate. So GDP doesn't matter. If we stopped measuring it tomorrow, nothing would change. So on the one hand, there's a prospect here that we're able to measure things that we couldn't measure, but why? Why do we care about that? For political attention is the answer. So if you can find new parts of the economy that you haven't measured before, they get political attention. And I think that shouldn't be the focus here. I think the relevant part of the story here is prices, or just signals that are doing coordinating. And what's about to open up is a whole new world of coordinating signals that didn't exist before. Right? That's the big thing. That's the game changer that we've never seen before. There's how many prices? Maybe 1 billion prices in the world, and then times 1 billion, there's 1 billion times 1 billion in terms of cross prices. We're now about to go up to quadrillions and gazillions and mazillions after that. And that's good, right? That means we can coordinate an economy so much better with all this new coordinating information, which requires a token or a money or whatever. But don't focus on that. The important thing to focus on is what it's doing. It's communicative, it's information, it's communicative information for coordination, right? That's the valuable part of it.
Yes, I like to make a plea for kind of value-sensitive design. So to be aware of what values go into your design principles when you make something, including a currency. For example, what I was talking about is actually, I guess, kind of a difference between a scarcity-based mindset and an abundance-based mindset, right? Think about an NGO. They have a scarcity-based mindset. There's a problem. We need to collect and direct resources to that problem. But the new types of foundations that manage open source economies say there is a problem, there's enough people that can solve the problem, so let's create an infrastructure of cooperation which allows people to adhere to this problem-solving community, And that actually the way they do it is through signaling systems, right? I think there's another tension, which I guess it's the individualism versus collectivism, communitarianism, right? And there is a certain assumption, especially in libertarian thinking, that the society is a bunch of isolated individuals who make contracts with each other, right? And that is often embedded in the design, as opposed to kind of thinking that we're always related, we're always part of communities, and so that doesn't necessarily then give the same effect when you actually design something, because you are going to look at different things. So I just want to say this. Here's my dream, and I'll conclude with that. And it really reinforcing what Jason is saying. And again, I question whether we need tokens for this or that. But so if we have more and more shared resources that people are contributing to, and if we have more and more generative business models of people making a livelihood that supports the creation of these shared resources, then the codependency that we have as market entities with the commons creates a basis of a massive collaborative culture. And then, if you use open supply chains, open book accounting, decision-making for planning, prices for markets, but signaling for the commons, right? So the signaling methods, massive stigmergy, the ability to see signals in a system allows us, for example, to do open source circular economies much more easily than if we are competing with each other and saying, oh, you can't see what I'm doing because you're going to steal my knowledge, right? So I think this will have huge implications, and if those things there can help that, then I'm all for it, because that will really bring down the transaction costs of human cooperation.
And so I would like to say two things. One is that I think that so to talk about like the different values. So I didn't present the last slide, but this is the idea of encoding values into value. So everyone has different value systems, and every community or every organization embody those value systems. But today we only have one way of actually transferring this value around, and that's through fiat currency. The idea is actually to have multiplicity. So right now we have a monopoly of value set, which is the market value set. And if we can actually come up, we can create new values, new value system, which are basically represented by those tokens on the blockchain. But in fact, what it is the ability for communities to express what take value by transferring tokens. And the interesting thing is that this is actually not scarce, because the community can generate as many tokens as they consider value to be. And so you can actually identify, by looking at how many tokens have been distributed and to what, you can actually see what is appreciated and what is valued the most by any given community. Then the question comes, when you start making those tokens transferable, the information changes. It's no longer about, if I hold those tokens, doesn't mean that I contributed to this community, but it means that in the world there is such amount of value according to this community. When they are non-transferable, they are actually a really good indicator of saying, if I collected this amount of tokens of reputation by this community and another by this community, it actually defines what kind of contributor I am. And on the second point, as to what happened when we actually turn everything into a reputation transaction, I would suggest reading this really good book of Cory Doctorow, Done and Out in the Magic Kingdom, which actually presents exactly like this dystopian vision of a society which is based on reputation. And I actually discussed with him about my vision of a reputation system. And I think there is one really important element to avoid this dystopia from happening, which is, and that's why perhaps reputation is not the right word, but what we're talking here, it's actually just an indicator of a contribution or influence. But the important thing is that this indicator does not relate, it's not a reputation on the individual. It's not saying you are a great person or you are a bad person. It's just saying your contribution as this value in the eyes of this particular value system. And in this way, we can interact with each other, and it's not like I expect you to evaluate me, but if I contribute and the community that you belong to value my contribution, I will earn something. And in this way, you can avoid, I think, the insane commodification of every social relationship.
just a little note. If you want to understand our discussion, you have to know what science fiction books we read. And I'm a Diamond Age person. This is our Bible, right? Everything we do, check out the Diamond Age and you understand what we're trying to do.
So we're unfortunately running out of time, so maybe we'll take just a couple questions. But we're really at a tipping point here of change. Our economic systems are in crisis, and this is only going to be a more pressing issue as we enter the digital age and more digitization. So
I have a question. The conversation is fantastic. How do we implement in a community, what makes it tangible in terms of the concepts you've been describing? And what might be some of the first steps so that a general Joe Blow on the street might get a hold of, and it might be just practically, symbolically doing something. I guess I'm interested in what would be a tangible first step within a community that other people other than in this room might understand.
Well, in Synereo, I mean, we've already got a test net up, so you can join that. You can join our community dialogue to make sure that we're producing the kind of social network that would be of value to someone like yourself. But we try to make all of this quite explicit, right? So as you're sharing content, you can promote the content with the amps. You can spend amps to go back to the originator. So, I mean, we try to provide very tangible experiences for these kinds of things in a user experience that maps onto something you might be familiar with as a social network.
Sure. I guess that presupposes at least a degree of digital literacy. And so I guess I'm going a bit beyond that in terms of...
And I just add also, if you want, so I work on this project, which is the Backfeed project, which creates tools in order to design or to help communities to decentralize themselves at the governance level. So it's essentially like a value distribution system, decentralized value distribution system. So there are already tools. I mean, there are many others, but so with Backfeed, we have like extensions and API in which like every contributor to a community can submit a contribution. And then there is this decentralized evaluation protocol that can be used by all the members of the community in order to identify what is the actual value. And then, so right now it's not yet on the blockchain, but the idea is that eventually this gets deployed on the blockchain. So any community that actually decides to plug itself into the Backfeed system can start issuing its own crypto tokens immediately.
So unfortunately, we're out of time, and I don't want to cut into our keynote with Vitalik, founder of Ethereum. So I'd like to thank our amazing panelists, and please ask them questions, talk, more discussion.